Order!
Créateur, que ton esprit nous accompagne et nous guide dans notre travail pour le bien-être de tous, pour la paix et la justice sur notre territoire et pour la reconnaissance constante de la dignité et des aspirations de ceux que nous servons. Amen.
Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to provide a personal explanation to clarify why I, as Attorney General, made the decision to intervene in the Supreme Court case relating to Bill C-92, an act respecting First Nations, Inuit, Métis children, youth and families. Yesterday, it was stated in this House that the intervention was an indication that the N.W.T reversed its support for the law passed by the Inuvialuit Regional Corporation pursuant to this federal act. This is not accurate. The very first sentence of the oral submission to the Supreme Court of Canada was, quote, "Let me begin by saying that the Northwest Territories is supportive of the inherent right of self-government, and we also support enabling Indigenous groups to create and operate child and family services," end quote. The GNWT remains committed and is actively working with the IRC and the Government of Canada on finalizing the NWT's first coordination agreement under the Federal Act. It was also stated in the House yesterday that the GNWT is putting its own interest to retain power and control above the interests of Inuvialuit children and youth. Mr. Speaker, I assure you that these were not my motives. The NWT does not have the same constitutional protections as the provinces do, and it was critical for the Supreme Court of Canada to be aware of the potential impacts of the federal law. The decision to intervene was in part driven by the need to obtain judicial clarity now in order to avoid a separate court process in the future if disagreements arise regarding the ambiguities of the Federal Act. I'm hopeful that the submissions made to the SCC will prove helpful and will provide judicial guidance on the interaction between Indigenous laws and territorial laws, and later today I will be tabling a document with further explanation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Minister statements. Minister statements. Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I rise to share some very good news out of Ottawa. On behalf of the Government of Canada, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has announced that there will be matching contributions made to United Way N.W.T. This generosity will have a direct positive impact on people affected by wildfires in the Northwest Territories, and I'm deeply grateful for Canada's support. The Government of the Northwest Territories also recently signed an agreement with Natural Resources Canada under the new Natural Resources Canada's new Fighting and Managing Wildfires in a Changing Climate Program Equipment Fund. This fund, which allows provinces and territories to cost-share investments for equipment such as vehicles, enhanced communication gear, and repairs to aging equipment, will be used for the purchase of aircraft, vehicles, dispatch consoles, and dust suppressant. Our agreement with Natural Resources Canada directly enables our government to procure specialized firefighting equipment and strengthen our capacity to manage wildlife fires that present a threat to our communities. Mr. Speaker, it's been truly humbling to see our neighbours across the country step up to assist those affected by wildfire and flooding over the last month. Later today, Minister Thompson and I will be releasing a statement outlining the incredibly generous support we've received from our neighbours in and out of the territory, but I want to take this opportunity to briefly highlight these good news stories out of Ottawa for my colleagues in the House. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Madam Premier. Minister statements. Minister statements. Minister responsible for the status of women.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to acknowledge the 4th anniversary of the release of the final report of the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. The final report describes the dire situation faced by Indigenous women, girls, and 2S LGBTQ and QIA+ peoples as genocide. It also delivers 231 calls for justice directed at governments, institutions, social service providers, industries, and all Canadians to effect change. Since the release of the final report, the Government of the Northwest Territories has taken steps to begin to effect change so that Indigenous women, girls, and 2S LGBTQIA+ peoples can feel valued, feel safe, and be honored in the Northwest Territories. We still have work to do. New people have been lost. As I speak today, people are actively searching for Frank Gubin, who went missing from Fort Smith earlier this month. Mr. Speaker, I would like to reinforce the call to encourage anyone with information that could help find Frank Rubin to please step forward. In order to stop the cycles of violence and abuse in the Northwest Territories communities and institutions, we must recognize and acknowledge the devastating root causes of violence that continue to be experienced by our populations. I am pleased to advise that the Government of the Northwest Territories is working on implementing the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls Action Plan tabled in November of 2022. An annual report on the implementation of the action plan is being prepared and will be posted to the MMIWG website later this month. When responding to violence directed at Indigenous women, girls, and 2S LGBTQ and QIA+ people, it is critical that partnerships be developed and allowed to grow so that trust can be fostered and solutions offered from various perspectives. Recognizing that partnership is key, I am pleased to advise that following Action 33 of the Action Plan, work is now underway to establish an MMIWG Advisory Committee. The purpose of the Advisory Committee is to provide advice and guidance to the N.W.T on MMIWG-related matters. With the cooperation of our community contacts, draft terms of reference were developed and will be shared with Indigenous governments, stakeholders, and other community partners for review and feedback. The intent is to have this advisory committee in place by fall. This committee will provide a pathway for communities to provide input into programs and services offered, incorporate changes to programs and services so that they reflect and address community needs and aspirations, and by being transparent and accountable in what we do. Mr. Speaker, a lot has happened over the past 4 years since the release of the final report of the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. The Government of the Northwest Territories remains committed to ending violence directed at Indigenous women, girls, and 2S LGBTQIA+ people. We will do this by implementing the action plan and continuing to work with community partners to develop solutions that are effective and sustainable, always striving to do better. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Minister statements. Minister statements. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to inform this House and residents of the N.W.T about the upcoming changes to the Extended Health Benefits Policy. They will come into effect on April 1st next year. The Government of the Northwest Territories is dedicated to ensuring fair access to extended health benefits for all N.W.T residents, with a focus on people with low income who are not covered under the existing policy. The existing Extended Health Benefits Policy has been in place for over 30 years without substantial change. The updated policy addresses gaps in coverage that have left some N.W.T residents without access to extended health benefits. It will better position the GNWT to sustain the delivery of this benefit program for all residents in the years to come. To ensure we created a robust new policy, we conducted a comprehensive review of coverage across various jurisdictions to align ourselves with provincial and territorial programs. In the fall of 2022, we asked for feedback from residents and stakeholders over a 3-month period. We gained valuable insights by listening to the lived experience of people accessing extended health benefits. This feedback from more than 700 people shaped the final policy. The new Extended Health Benefits Policy makes some key changes, including access to benefits which will be dependent upon an annual income assessment. Residents above the established low-income thresholds will need to contribute to the cost of their benefits to reasonable limits adjusted for family size and region where applicable. The new policy no longer requires residents to have a specified condition to access benefits. Instead, there are a suite of benefits available to all residents, each with its own terms and conditions for eligibility and levels of coverage. The changes we've made to the extended health benefits policy have nothing to do with seniors age 60 and older. Their current benefit levels continue. There are no changes for residents who access the non-insured health benefits and Métis health benefits. Mr. Speaker, as we move forward, we're committed to careful planning and implementation of the changes to the policy. We will have information and staff available to support residents to access benefits, and we'll plan to have this available well in advance of April 1st, 2024. We want to ensure a smooth transition for all residents because we understand the importance of stability and continuity to access benefits. Mr. Speaker, these policy changes are a testament to our commitment to improve equitable access to health benefits and thereby health outcomes for all N.W.T. residents. By addressing the gaps in our current policy, we strive to provide support to those who need it most while aligning with jurisdictions across Canada and working towards a sustainable health and social services system. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Minister's statements. Minister responsible for Housing, N.W.T.
Mr. Speaker, earlier this sitting, I was very pleased to update the House on the establishment of the Northwest Territories Housing Forum. The N.W.T. Housing Forum is just one of 42 programs and policy changes that Housing N.W.T. staff have been working tirelessly on in collaboration with partners from across the territory. Mr. Speaker, later today I will table a progress update on the 42 actions arising from the program and policy review. The update, which will be posted on Housing N.W.T.'s website, gives a snapshot of where we are in terms of implementing those actions, many of which are already being implemented, with many more continuing a rollout. Accountability is one of Housing N.W.T.'s core values as it's set out in our mandate. This progress update is an important aspect of Housing N.W.T.'s accountability to the public and to our partners. Mr. Speaker, Housing N.W.T. is making excellent progress on the implementation of these actions. Only 5 of the actions are subject to be in moderate amount of delay based on the original projected timeline. Many of these actions are already being implemented, and some will require further work with the N.W.T. Housing Forum and under other partners to finalize. Mr. Speaker, later today I will also be tabling Housing N.W.T.'s energy strategy and energy blueprint along with what we heard report. The energy plans are another action reinforced in the strategy, which benefits from the input of the Council of Leaders Working Group and our partners. Mr. Speaker, I'm proud of these changes and proud of Housing N.W.T.'s staff and partners for making these possible. Every day I'm looking for progress, more steps forward to be made. Despite these changes, though I want to make one thing perfectly clear, Housing N.W.T.'s renewal process is not yet complete. This process is embedded in Housing N.W.T.'s mandate and its approaches by promoting a culture of innovation and continuous improvement. Renewal will have a lifetime beyond this Legislative Assembly. Mr. Speaker, I would like to conclude by thanking Housing N.W.T.'s many partners and staff for making these changes possible, and I look forward to seeing the positive outcomes in the years to come. Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Minister's statements. Member statements. Member for Sabacha.
Mr. Speaker, today I would like to end the session on a positive note. First, I want to wish all the Indigenous leaders across the N.W.T. a safe and wonderful summer. As a former chief, I want to wish my former colleagues well and hope they, along with their constituents, all have a good summer assemblies this year. In addition, Mr. Speaker, I want to wish all my colleagues here in this House, including you, Mr. Speaker, a good and restful summer. I'd also like to thank the staff of the Legislative Assembly for always helping to ensure we're on track and following all protocols, and for the continued support in our work for the people of the N.W.T. Also, Mr. Speaker, I want to mention some of the activities that will be happening in Fort Smith over the summer. First of all, in June, there will be the Aurora College Thabatcha campus graduation, followed by the opening of the Fort Smith Métis Daycare, and then the Treaty Land Entitlement Days that are hosted by the Salt River First Nation. Next, the Smith Landing First Nation will be hosting the Dene Assembly in July in Fort Fitzgerald. And then in August, the annual Dark Sky Festival. Lastly, Mr. Speaker, I want to wish all the amazing constituents of Thabatcha a happy summer season as well. I'd also like to extend this message to all the leadership of Fort Smith, which includes Salt River First Nation, the Fort Smith Métis Council, and the town of Fort Smith. Thank you all to all the leadership and to my constituents for your continued support as MLA for Thabatcha. Thank you as well to my community team for always supporting me and for the people that I serve in our community. You know who you are. And also, I want to once again thank my family for their steadfast support. I truly could not do this work without you by my side, which includes my husband, Peter, my sons, Jerry and Mickey, and as always, my dog, Rambo. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Thabatcha. Member statements. Member for Haver South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as this school year ends, I would like to recognize and congratulate all those students from Hay River, Enterprise, West Point First Nation, and Acknowledgements First Nation who are graduating from École Boreale, Diamond Jeunesse Secondary School, Chief Sunrise Education Center, and Aurora College. Mr. Speaker, we can all appreciate and acknowledge the commitment and sacrifice these students put in to achieve their status as graduates. That chapter is now closed, and it is time to take that next step. Whether it is to further their education, join the workforce, or travel the world, it is only the beginning of their new journey. Mr. Speaker, for each to achieve the status of graduate, we must also recognize the parents, caregivers, family, friends, and those teachers who, throughout the years, supported and encouraged each of them to succeed. I know that each graduate will look back and understand the importance of this achievement and, in turn, convey the importance of education to their children and others as they move forward in life. Mr. Speaker, in closing, I congratulate the graduates of 2023 and wish them all a bright, successful, and healthy future. And lastly, I would like to congratulate my granddaughter Anaya, who will graduate from grade 9 and now soon to be a high school student, and any black hair I have left will now be gray.
Thank you, Member for Haver South. Member statements. Member for Framelink.
Monsieur le Président, in August 2023, grade 4 to 6 and grade 9 classes in all N.W.T schools will be transitioning from the Alberta curriculum of studies to the BC system. All other school grades will transition in subsequent years. While ECE officials have been working on this for years, teachers working directly with students have not. The word I've received is that teachers are not ready to make this transition because the basic groundwork has not been completed. I've been told that ECE put together a number of working groups to adapt the BC curriculum to an N.W.T perspective, and that is very important work. However, most of these groups have not yet finished their work, and teachers have had no updates on their progress. The assessment working group did not even start meeting until February, and to date, there has been no communication on its recommendations. The South Slave actually hired an outside consultant to create a new reporting system, but in Yellowknife, there has been no such guidance. It's not the content of the new curriculum that is a source of stress, Mr. Speaker. The problems arise with assessment, reporting, and changing classroom practices to address competencies rather than outcomes. Our teachers pride themselves on being well-informed, ready to teach, and able to deliver their programs and communicate confidently with students and parents. While teachers are working to prepare for the fall, they have been allowed little time to prepare and adjust to the new curriculum, which isn't even finished yet. I'm told that minimal time for the transition has been granted, largely at the expense of other important initiatives within schools and the department. We need to trust our professional frontline educators when they tell us that what can be a good idea is being rolled out badly or too quickly. The department has asserted the need to shift to a different curriculum to give N.W.T students a better and more relevant education, and I agree with that, but let's get it right. I'll have questions for the Minister of Education, Culture and Employment on the transition to the BC school curriculum later today. Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Frame Lake. Member statements. Member statements. Member for N.W.T.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I too would like to just wish everybody a good and safe summer, all my colleagues, and remember a little bit of family time is always good, and time at home. I can't wait to get home tomorrow. So to my constituents, to my graduates across the N.W.T, congratulations on your big step of achievement, and thank them and thank their parents for getting them to where they're at, and wish them all the best. And we're always here for you in regards for support and stuff like that. And I'm really excited for them on their future steps. Also, Mr. Speaker, another big one, I really want to thank our frontline staff across the Northwest Territories. In my home community and my riding of N.W.T is, the health centre, all the nursing stations and stuff like that, all the work that they're doing. It doesn't go unseen. We're so blessed to have good staff in the communities. Our RCMP, thank them for what they're doing, especially our school staff, the teachers and the staff is at the Hamlet office, and our leadership back home, our mayors and staff, community corps, our grads again. And June 5th is Happy N.W.T Day, so Happy N.W.T Day early for a few days. So I'm looking forward to being home and celebrating that. And I remember when that, long time ago when that was signed, I think 41 years ago, I was sitting there waiting for a piece of cake. So as an 11-year-old kid, watching it happen and, seeing something like that, to seeing where we're at today and what our claim group has done, and the successes we have as an N.W.T people as a whole. I'm really proud of that and the heritage. But Mr. Speaker, to all my colleagues, have a good, safe summer. Everybody out back home in the Delta and the N.W.T, I know geese hunting is still happening, so be safe while you're geese hunting. Be safe while you're going to be whaling here in another couple of weeks, and we're looking forward to that. And just, like I said to all my colleagues again, just have a good summer. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for the N.W.T. Member statements. Member statements. Member for Nivik Twin Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in 2018, Housing N.W.T had conducted a pilot project to help provide better wraparound supports for tenants living in public housing. That pilot project was conducted in Betchico, and it created a new position within housing titled Housing Stability Worker, whose job was to work with housing tenants to support them in various ways to keep their housing and stabilize their living situation. Mr. Speaker, according to the N.W.T Housing Corporation's annual report for 2019-2020, it's the job of the housing stability worker to work with vulnerable tenants to develop housing plans that addresses aspects of everyday life, such as financial literacy, housing arrears, employment, health and wellness, and food security. The position was created as a navigator that did home visits to help residents enhance their knowledge of existing government supports and to address a range of social issues that affects housing instability. Mr. Speaker, sometimes this government's pilots are very great ideas, but then they are short-lived. And I think job positions like this and this pilot project was a very interesting concept, and I believe it should be continued and expanded upon to other regions and communities, including my own riding of Inuvik. I know that this position and the work that they do would be well suited and welcomed in Inuvik. However, it appears that this pilot project may be over now, since it was only scheduled to be active for 2 years in Betchico. Mr. Speaker, it is innovative programs and services such as that of the housing stability worker that needs to be conducted on a broader basis within the Northwest Territories, because all communities and regions face similar social issues. So therefore, they would all benefit from this type of position being offered across the board in all regions. And I will have questions for the Minister of Housing, N.W.T, at the appropriate time. And Mr. Speaker, because I have 30 seconds left, I would just like to congratulate all of the Inuvik graduates that are going to be graduating this Saturday, and to all the post-secondary graduates that are finishing college, and to Chelsea Jerome, who is just graduating from her nursing degree program, and it's very exciting to have another Inuvialuit nurse come in the region. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Inuvik Twin Lakes. Member statements. Member for Tunadewelde.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today as a voice of concern and frustration regarding the recent press release issued by the Deputy Mayor for resolution. It is disheartening to witness a lack of accountability and transparency alleged against the Minister of Municipal and Community Affairs in his dealing with the community. This concern raised in the press release demand immediate attention and action. The withdrawal from the co-management arrangement, despite the struggling accumulated deficit and projected deficit, is simply unacceptable. The financial position of the Hamlet of Fort Resolution is in dire strait, and MAC's failure to provide full disclosure and communicate effectively. With the elected council, it is their election of duty. The community deserves better. The absence of MACA representatives during the community meeting on May 10, 2023, and the lack of updates on the administration of the Hamlet can only be interpreted as a disregard for the concerns of my constituents. How can MACA claim to represent the community's best interests when they don't even show up to address their legitimate concerns? This level of empathy is simply unbelievable given the seriousness of the situation. It is right for the residents of Fort Resolution to deserve answers, deserves transparency, and deserve undivided attention of the department in this mess as soon as possible. The decision of the elected councils not to voluntarily resign is commendable. Continuity and accountability are crucial during these times of crisis. However, it is deeply troubling that our community has had to endure such challenges without the support of as repeatedly requested from MACA. Their voices has fallen on deaf ears, and it's high time that they receive support and assistance they deserve. The issue faced by the elected council during their tenure, including the significant financial challenges, internal control issues, human resources concerns, must be addressed urgently. The Hamlet needs comprehensive feedback from MACA and action to rectify the multiple issues plaguing our community. Rest assured, as your elected representatives, I will tirelessly advocate for resources, assistance, and support that Fort Resolution requires. I will not rest until MACA steps up and our community concerns are addressed. Mr. Speaker, no one is happy with the situation, and it's time to move forward in an open, transparent, collaborative approach between all levels of government for the betterment of Fort Resolution. I will have questions for the Minister of MACA at the appropriate time. Merci.
Thank you, member for Tunadewelde. Member statements. Member for Great Slave.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, June is National Indigenous History Month. Throughout the month, Canadians will be acknowledging Indigenous peoples, First Nations, the Inuit, and the Métis. As settlers, my ancestors were welcomed to these lands by Indigenous people. They were taught how to survive and how to navigate through the untouched regions of what we now call the provinces and territories of Canada. They built relationships with nations and shared with each other the teachings, knowledge, and skills of their cultures in an effort to form community. However, there is a dark side, the true collective history that was not taught until recently, a history of colonial, genocidal policies and doctrines that threaten to destroy all Indigenous people and their ways to assimilate them into a dominant European structure. I say we were taught about this recently because Indigenous people have lived on these lands since time immemorial, longer than the explorations of 1492, older than America, older than the 156 years of Canada, So yes, the 21st century is recent to learn the truth about the First Peoples of this land. The Government of Canada's website acknowledges National Indigenous History Month and provides some ideas how to acknowledge the month. However, we must take it further than listening to music, watching a movie, or reading a book. We can learn by participating and taking the initiative to go to celebrations and gatherings in our community and initiate conversations with Indigenous people. To not take over the conversation or to rush through a conversation, but to help create respectful spaces to intentionally listen to what is being shared with us. It is only when we make the journey from our intellect to our heart can we hear each other's truth and to know the person better. My CA shared a teaching her elder taught her, and I quote, "Indigenous people seek to build relationships first, then do the work afterwards. It is to get to know each other better, to learn about each other, to celebrate and mourn with each other, to care for each other. When you connect in this way, you want each other to succeed. You become allies and helpers in the face of threats, and more importantly, you become genuine friends. Non-Indigenous cultures seek to do the opposite, work first and succeed at all costs. Power and control is the foundation, and relationships are fine, but not a priority." End quote. I seek unanimous consent to conclude my statement. Thank you.
Thank you, member for Great Slave. The member seeking unanimous consent to conclude her statement. Are there any nays? There are no nays. You may conclude your statement.
Thank you, colleagues. I want to say that I acknowledge, support, and appreciate the true history of Indigenous peoples, not just for the month of June, but all year long. And I will seek to build the relationships first. And now that I have a little bit more time, I would also like to wish all the graduates across the territory a good celebration, a safe celebration, and to not drink and drive. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Great Slave. Member statements. Member statements. Member for Kamloops.
Mr. Speaker, I remember these sunny days as a child, the anticipation of after-school shenanigans, bike rides and dock jumping in Back Bay, and of course, counting down the days to Raven Mad Days. But Yellowknife streets have changed. Today, the challenges that plagued the halls of apartment buildings all winter have spilled into the streets for summer. This isn't an easy issue to tackle in 2 minutes. It's layered in both history, root causes, tried Band-Aid solutions, and potential long-term solutions. This town has cycled through responses to escalated public intoxication-fueled violence, from arrests to ambulance calls to ill-equipped, underfunded organizations to relying on our ER staff. The RCMP have stopped what they call arrests for addiction, and where once people spent time sobering up in cells, they continue to use substance to numb pain in a town without easily accessible, culturally appropriate supports. In turn, ambulances show up for call-outs they don't have the resources to even Band-Aid, and nurses find themselves in unsafe workspaces being asked to solve long-term issues with short-term solutions. In my lifetime, our streets have reached a boiling point as they are speckled with alcohol-fueled fights, very public crack use, and residents, including children, being caught in the middle. People are hurting themselves and others as their trauma reaches levels they cannot manage, and Yellowknife residents are concerned about the safety of street-involved people, the safety of children, and the safety of residents. Mr. Speaker, removing Band-Aids without the resources and supports to care for the wound doesn't work. The state of our downtown and the absence of adequate short-term supports is having a ripple effect, and this town needs support, resources to hit the streets today. Funded foot patrol teams that pair enforcement with health professionals bringing presence, resources, and relationships to our streets need to happen now. Supports for business owners legally required to provide safe workplaces but are putting themselves between residents and violence on our streets needs to start now. Situational tables to handle specific case-by-case supports need to get back on track. Mr. Speaker, people want to feel safe. Kids need to be able to walk home from school. Women need to be able to walk without being harassed, touched, and threatened, and all residents deserve safety. I will have questions for the Minister of Health and Social Services. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Kamloops. Member statements. Member statements. Member for Mumfwee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My summer message. Mr. Speaker, summer is upon us, and many of the young people will be on their well-deserved summer break. Mr. Speaker, I want to congratulate all the graduates from Chief Jimmy Bruno School, from Mizzi Community School in N.W.T, Jean Witrati School in Gamity, and Alexis Aramaker School in Wikwiti. I want to thank all the students, parents, guardians, teachers, support staff, principals, and many more who worked hard working with our young people in the communities to complete the school year. For many, it was not easy. There were challenges. But people coming together, working together, helped to move forward. There are still a lot of family and friends are still grieving for loss of loved ones. But I would say to all the people who help, be proud of the accomplishment that they have made. As I have said many times to our young people, Mr. Speaker, some of the young people will go to post-secondary, some will work, some will go in training, some will choose to travel, but you do need money to go places or live life off the grid. As we go through life, sometimes things can get in our way. Difficulty in our families, with our friends, or maybe in school, a subject we find hard to understand. It is easy to just give up or quit. And this is not moving forward in life. As a young person, you have to keep pushing yourself forward. Don't give up, and you can accomplish anything. Mr. Speaker, I would also like to extend the congratulations to all the post-secondary graduates from Klitschko region. Job well done. Now the world is their oyster. Further, I would also like to acknowledge, honor the family members and friends that we have lost in the communities. Elders like Elizabeth Michelle, 99 years old. In Klitschko, we called her Mama Cho. And Elder Philip Dranek, 94. And my god-sister, Mary Ann Football, former Grand Chief Eddie Erasmus, and others who are no longer with us. Mr. Speaker, I seek unanimous support to conclude my statement.
Thank you, Member for Mumfree. The member seeking unanimous consent to conclude her statement. Are there any nays? There are no nays. You may conclude your statement.
Mr. Speaker, we have lost too many young people. Their lives are priceless. They are our future. I encourage anyone struggling to reach out for help. Indigenous people are resilient. We have said that, and it's been known. We will continue to support one another to heal and move forward. Please, don't drink and drive. Listen to your parents, grandparents, guardians, and elders. You can have fun without drugs and alcohol in your life. There is more to life and living. Mr. Speaker, I wish all the people in Klitschko region and leaders a happy and safe summer. I know many of them will be traveling. May God bless them, keep them and their families safe on their journey. Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Mumfree. Member statements. Member for Yellowknife South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, back in April, the Legislative Assembly was host to 19 youth from across the Northwest Territories for our annual Youth Parliament. There is starting to be a trend amongst the youth who have represented Yellowknife South. When they are given the opportunity to speak in this House to deliver their message to us as MLAs and to the people of the Northwest Territories, they have chosen to speak to the action plan to address the crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and 2S LGBTQ and QIA+ peoples. Mr. Speaker, today is the second anniversary of the delivery of the final report of the National Inquiry. And so, Mr. Speaker, I've chosen to take this opportunity to share the words of the latest youth to stand in this spot who spoke to the action plan. Following words are those that were written and read in this legislature by Nico Morin, who represented Yellowknife South as the minister responsible for the status of women in the 2023 Youth Parliament. Mr. Speaker, for many years now, Indigenous women, girls, and 2S LGBTQ QIA+ people have been found victims of numerous violence and abuse cases around the North, but rarely is there enough support for the survivors or their families. Survivors are left with a great deal of trauma to work through, which not only affects them, but has repercussions on family members who are left with a deep-rooted fear of that certain event happening again. This is even more so for families of victims who did not make it, as they are left to deal with that grief as well. As we know, this trauma is especially hard for Indigenous people who are also still dealing with the intergenerational trauma of historical and modern colonial practices. Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, Girls, and 2S LGBTQIA+ Call to Action 81 calls on the government to enhance the holistic approach of support to survivors, their families, and friends. This is important because it provides a diverse range of healing methods while also keeping a strong connection to Indigenous culture and medicinal practices. Mr. Speaker, in the N.W.T's action plan in response to the MMIWG calls to action, the government plans to provide the Indigenous governments, hamlets, councils, and local organizations with funding to put in place a comprehensive, community-based victim services program to help provide much-needed support to survivors of crime and their families. These services are being offered at a community level because communities are best able to identify the uniqueness of their residents. Today, I want to acknowledge that just because a person survives abuse or acts of violence does not mean that their pain is over and that they should be expected to return to a normal life. As the Minister responsible for the status of women, MMIWG is very relevant to my portfolio. Creating programs to help victims and their families heal from the traumatic events they had to endure will be greatly beneficial for women, girls, and 2S LGBTQIA+. Mr. Speaker, we recognize the need to move on many more calls to action. By addressing the actions one at a time, we can ensure a well-thought-out response and approach to the calls to action and give them the much-needed attention they deserve. Mr. Speaker, I am grateful to Ms. Morin for those words and for reminding me of some of the reasons and motivations that led me to run for office, of the passion that we should never cease to bring to this job, and to her courage to take on this topic, one that can seem overwhelming, but which will be only solved by each of us giving a voice to social change. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Yellowknife South. Member Statements. Member for Nahende.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as you're all aware, the community of Sumbakay was the third community that had to evacuate this fire season. I can tell you that the community leadership and the band administration did a great job in following their community evacuation plan. I had the opportunity to speak with the band manager, and she explained the community was registering everybody to evacuate at that time. As she and the Chief Jumbo explained to me, they're being proactive as there was a potential for the fire to impact the communities based on anticipated smoke that could close the local airport. Mr. Speaker, there is a likelihood of smoke closing the airport in a few days because the planned ignition operation adjacent to the community. As well, they are having conversations with ECC and MACA and factored in the weather and wind for the next few days, so they made this decision. Mr. Speaker, I can advise you, when the community did call the evacuation order, they asked the Department of Municipal and Community Affairs Regional EMO not to sound the alert until they had the opportunity to tell the resident. They did not want to cause more stress with the evacuees. As you can imagine, this is a very scary thing to happen. In speaking with the chief, he explained to me that part of the plan was to get 75 evacuees to Fort Simpson, and this was done in a timely manner. I can also advise you that 13 residents stayed behind as essential staff. Evacuees were scheduled to fly into Fort Simpson Recreation, or were scheduled to stay in the Fort Simpson Recreation Center in the gym and arena. The village had set up the evacuation center full of cots. However, almost all the evacuees have found other places to stay with family, friends, or other locations in the community. Mr. Speaker, the village will be providing meals at the evacuation center for the evacuees. There will be meals provided 3 times a day. As well, there are tables set up in case anybody wants to play cards, visit, and there's a projection screen where people can watch TV. Mr. Speaker, residents and businesses of Fort Simpson have been amazing hosts. I've heard of businesses providing a pallet of water, another business going into the community to bring their pets out, and people donating baking goods and food. They are doing what they can to help out. Mr. Speaker, I realize it's a scary time for the residents of Summit K, and I hope that they get home soon. As well, as you could imagine, we're hoping we can see some rain. Mr. Speaker, I'd like unanimous consent to conclude my statement. Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Nahende. The member seeking unanimous consent to conclude a statement. Are there any nays? There are no nays. You may conclude your statement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, colleagues. In closing, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the Summit K leadership, their staff, the regional EMO team, and ECC staff on the work that they are doing, as well to the people and businesses of Fort Simpson. Thank you for being a caring neighbor. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to just close and encourage everybody to be very cautious of the fire season we're into. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Nahende. Member statements. Member statements. Member for Satu.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to acknowledge the grads in the SAW2 this morning. I'm quite excited about this grad class as they started their education in grade 9, 2019, when we all got elected. They have too seen us through the pandemic. They have too seen us through the floods and the fires. They continued their education as well. I'm proud to say that in the SAW2 we've got 26 grads this year. And I'd like to name them off and congratulate for Norman Wells, Cameron Barney, Reese Harley, Briseis Kenny, Isaac McKay, Summer Rose, Summer Wiley, Ariana Cushon, Danielle Cushon, and also for Cova Lake, Jalen Cushon, Adriana Stewart, and for Delaney, Madison Baton Bioni, Yetse McKenzo, Taylor Tucho, Nikki Tucho, Darian Tucho, Isaiah Kelly, Corbin Takazo, Preston Tetzo, and for Fort Good Hope, Gwyneth Amos, Joy Kakwe, Marcus Proctor, Marilyn McNeely, Mason Lafferty, Tessa Granjam, and Fort Toledo, Mason Macaulay Bea, and Michaela Antoine. Mr. Speaker, I would also like to thank the former leadership in my riding and also the teachers who continue to provide opportunity in the SAW2 for the students to become successful. I'd also like to highlight the achievements of my riding of Stephen Kakwe and Ethel Blondin, who through their legacy inspired for the SAW2 and the students to become high achievers. Mr. Speaker, I don't have a story of how I got here to the north. I've been here all my life, and I'm with all of you here today, and we continue that legacy in this house. We continue to inspire students coming forward. We inspired them together with their dreams, their ambitions, and their hearts. And soon they will be filling our seats here at the Legislative Assembly. Congratulations to the class of 2023. Masi, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for SAW2. Member statements. Member statements. Returns to oral questions. Returns to oral questions. Recognition of visitors in the gallery. Recognition of visitors in the gallery. Member for N.W.T.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's not too many times I get to stand up and welcome people in the Assembly. But I'd like to welcome Manitoulin Vice President of Operations, Mr. Kevin Ramsey, into the House today. And welcome, Kevin, and thank you for all the work that he's doing and all the donations that he does in the Beaufort Delta for all communities, and it doesn't go unnoticed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Member for the Nutput. Recognition of visitors in the gallery. Member for Nuvik-Bootlick.
Queen Aini Okakti, I'd like to recognize our interpreters from Inuvik, from the Inuvialuit interpreters, Lillian Elias and Valerie Stephenson. Queen Aini for all the hard work that they do for us. And I often enjoy tuning into the channel and listening and just learning some of the words again. So I really appreciate that. Queen Aini, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Nuvik-Bootlick. Recognition of visitors in the gallery. Member for Yellowknife South.
White horse. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this whole session I've had two very hard-working pages from Yellowknife South. Misha Leonce and Morgan Martiniak. I was hoping to catch a day when I knew they were both in the room, but I don't know I've quite caught that. But they're in the building. They've been with us all week, and thank you very much for their hard work.
Thank you, Member for Yellowknife South. Recognition of visitors in the gallery. Member for SAW2.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to recognize the interpreters as well, too, who have been with me since 2019. I appreciate their work. I appreciate their broadcasting and interpreting with our proceedings here in the North Slavey language. Ms. Sarah Cleary and Ms. Teresa Echinelli, your work is very much appreciated. Masi.
Thank you, Member for Satu. Recognition of visitors in the gallery. Member for Mumfui.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would also like to acknowledge two Klitschko citizens attending school in Yellowknife, Mika McKenzie and Emily Bishop. I would also like to acknowledge and thank all the interpreters for a job well done, and especially to Klitschko interpreters Jonas Lafferty and Miro Sundberg, and now I see Lena Dragis. So I would like to say thank you to all of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Mumfui. Recognition of visitors in the gallery. Member for Hay River North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to recognize the page from Hay River North who's been with us this week, Mr. Nicholas Graham. Right now he is a page, and you might see them sitting around the room, but I'm confident that one day he'll be sitting in one of our seats. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Hay River North. Recognition of visitors in the gallery. Member for Tunide Welde.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I also like to thank all the translators, Jonas Lafferty, Lena Dragis, Tom Monka, Mark Casway, also my CEA, Shirley Seta. Also, I'd like to recognize and say thank you to all the clerk and the staff and the pages, and especially the cooks that were providing meals. Merci.
Thank you, Member for Tunde Welde. Recognition of visitors in the gallery. Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I also want to thank the interpreters, but I also want to apologize to them. I know that I am one of the ones that's always a repeat offender for speaking too quickly in the House, and I know that they all bear with me, and I very much appreciate it. I also want to thank the staff and advisors for our work. It's been a tough one scheduling the regular members with all of our interests and wants, and they work really hard. And as well the pages, because they're always fun to have, and I haven't looked once to see my water glass at a low state, and of course my constituency assistant Maggie, who is always teaching me and I am learning from. Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Great Slave. Recognition of visitors in the gallery. Recognition of visitors in the gallery. Acknowledgements. Oral questions. Member for Hay River South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, for those persons that made application for the Evacuee Income Distribution Support Program, can the Minister of Finance confirm if there's a telephone number, as of yet, that applicants can call to follow up on the status of their application? Or if not, is there another option for evacuees to confirm the status of those applications and payment? Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Hay River South. Minister responsible for Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, Mr. Speaker, I can now confirm that indeed there is a phone number. It is noted. The contact number is now noted online. The application form is actively being updated, as I had indicated it would be yesterday. The message has gone out to the MLAs of the ridings, or will this morning, with that information. As I said yesterday, this is a role that public servants weren't occupying just a couple of weeks ago. So, I appreciate some patience from folks, but those numbers are there now directly so that people can contact. We'll be going to the manager of financial operations to help work through any details. But the form, again, that's your first stop, is to the webpage with the form, and that will have all that information now available. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Hay River South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, with the rollout of any type of funds, there's always a cutoff date. And I just want to make sure that, that any of the evacuees do not miss that cutoff date, because there was some confusion as to who may or may not be able to actually apply. So I'd ask the Minister, is there a cutoff date for making an application under the Evacuee Income Distribution Support Program? Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Hay River South. Minister responsible for Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This program does have a start and end date to it. The applications are, again, for anyone who is under an order of 7 days or more. anyone that was under that order and who had an income disruption should be looking at the form and considering to make the application. The end date for accepting those applications is 30 days after the evacuation order was issued. There's not a lot of paperwork involved. There's not a lot of supporting documents involved. That was done intentionally so that folks can get this done as a very quick process. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions, member for Haver South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, first of all, I'd like to say thank you to the United Way for all they've done throughout this event, and the support they provided to KFN and Hay River residents. So, Mr. Speaker, the United Way now, I understand, has responsibility of dispersing funds raised for evacuees of KFN and Hay River. Can the Minister confirm how this will be achieved, and will the Minister commit to providing a staff person to temporarily assist United Way if need be? Because I understand, they kind of run on limited staff and volunteers. Thank you.
Thank you, member for Haver South. Minister responsible for finance.
Mr. Speaker, there's a lot of good news for United Way today. Obviously, the announcement has gone out from the federal government that they'll be matching donations. We're likely looking at over $1 million going into United Way, all in the space of less than a month. That is fantastic news. So folks are aware. The United Way works with communities, community governments, local organizations, nonprofit organizations, and then disperses funds to them. So two parts to my message is, number one, if you have a cost, an expense, a need, a concern that you need some supports with, is to reach out to your local organizations because they can work with the United Way to access those funds. But then, Mr. Speaker, since almost the beginning of when the N.W.T matched donations, we realized that that's a large influx of money going in. We immediately started to look at what we could do to help support the United Way. They do have some part-time staff, I understand, but this is a lot of money and it's come in very quickly. So my understanding is that we have now been in touch with their staff, been in touch with their board. Their board chair is on the way back from being out of town, and we'll be working with them to ensure that whatever capacity they need, so letting them be the ones, the drivers of deciding what they need, but that we will be able to support them, whether that's with some staffing or some other mechanism to help them get the money out the door. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary, member for Haver South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, a lot of work's been done on this, and but the question is, has any money been dispersed yet? And if not, when will it be dispersed? Because people are still calling, they're still waiting, and hopefully within this next few days we'll hear some good news or I'll hear some good news that somebody actually got something. Thank you.
Thank you, member for Haver South. Minister responsible for finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you might recall yesterday, I think there were approximately 80 applications already in. And I can confirm that Department of Finance staff have been in direct contact with a number of those individuals. There was some, the form is quite short, but I gather there was some information still missing. So that first crop is going to be processed with either checks or direct deposits to be issued by next week. And again, with I think the exchanges here, hopefully more folks will be applying, and then those checks or direct deposit, with that information now being on the form, we'll hopefully be able to issue even more quickly. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions, member for Inuvik Twin Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, can the Minister of Housing N.T. explain what the housing stability worker position is and tell us whether the pilot project in Betchco was successful? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Inuvik Twin Lakes. Minister responsible for housing N.W.T.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you so much to the member for addressing this issue here. The housing stability worker in Betchco was very successful. It was actually introduced in the last government and also created by the Premier at that time, who held the housing portfolio. We did address the housing evictions. We did address housing needs, wraparound services, and that may have been required. Since then, housing has created and worked with the CLECHO. We do have a housing working group right now. The decision of that working group is that the CLECHO had wanted to take the position, so we are now working side by side with the CLECHO and looking at how this position will be tailored, and we look into the future as to filling this position in the region. Must seat, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Inuvik-Twin Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for that, Minister. Mr. Speaker, can the Minister tell us if there's any plans to expand the housing stability worker into other communities and regions beyond Betchico? As in my member statement, you know, this is something that's happening in a lot of our, especially in our regional centres, and I'm sure it's happening here in Yellowknife too. So thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Inuvik-Twin Lakes. Minister responsible for housing N.W.T.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member for the question. That this is one of the areas that I did highlight. Homelessness and housing supports is crucially needed. Throughout the Northwest Territories, we have a variety of different situations that we need to address. Along with mortgages as well, we have units that we need to be transferring. For me, those were the two major highlights while working within this portfolio. I would like to see these positions in every region, to be honest, Mr. Speaker. It is quite needed. It is very much needed. We need to address housing in a different, innovative, collaborative way, and this is a key on how we should be doing things differently. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Inuvik-Twin Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, talking about this pilot project, it was a pilot project, so it was scheduled for 2 years. The funding, I guess, was for 2 years. So is there still funding for this position as it's for Clecho, and it's not been filled, or is there something that has to come back? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Inuvik-Twin Lakes. Minister responsible for housing N.W.T.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member for the question. The funding was a government position, but we did end up providing a community initiative project approach with the Clecho Housing Working Group. That is how the position is funded right now. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary. Member for Inuvik-Twin Lakes.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr. Speaker. You know, when we come in here, we try to give our ministers a little bit of an opportunity to come with the answers, but sometimes as we get our answers, things change. So I guess my last question to this minister would be, would this minister be commit to working with the Indigenous groups in Inuvik to try and create this position there to deal with some of the issues that are going on in housing? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Inuvik-Twin Lakes. Minister responsible for housing N.W.T.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member for the question. I'm very passionate about this portfolio, and I'm quite excited, but you know, I just want to let the member know is that I would like to see if there's any vacant positions that are not filled within housing, and create a position that would soon be able to work side by side with the new housing position that we are creating that is addressing homelessness. I would like to be innovative. I would like to see things change and address the issue in the Beaufort Delta differently. So I would like to follow up with the member as well. We do have continuous conversations with the Indigenous governments, but I would like to see what we do have available. If this position is able to be filled on a term position, absolutely, I would like to support that and follow up with the member as well too. We do have a new position supposed to be housed in the northern part of the territory, housed in Inuvik, and if we can get a position to work side by side to address these positions, homelessness in the members' riding, absolutely. I'll bring this back to my department and look for a vacant position to fill that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Calm down. Just kidding. Oral questions. Member for Cam Lake.
Mr. Speaker, my first questions are for the Minister of Education, Culture and Employment. Earlier this week, I delivered a member statement about childcare struggles in the Northwest Territories. It's one of the top things that I'm hearing about right now from the people that I serve. I also tabled a document that day by the CD Howe that outlined potential solutions. One such solution pointed to shared equity mortgage programs to increase childcare space infrastructure. Is the N.W.T or ECE willing to explore creative solutions like this to increase infrastructure, specifically for childcare spaces in the Northwest Territories? Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Cam Lake, Minister responsible for Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, of course we're willing to explore innovative solutions. I have not had a chance to look at the report the member tabled. It seems like every week there is a report coming out on childcare, and I do get to them as they come out, but I haven't gotten to this one yet, so I'll have a look at it and go from there. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions, Member for Cam Lake.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Minister for that. Mr. Speaker, the other thing that is currently on the go right now with ECE in regards to childcare is determining a wage grid for childcare workers. I'm wondering what standards are being used to determine the childcare wage grid, and will the standards be based on minimum wage, living wage, salaries currently paid to similarly educated ELCC providers based in schools? Where is the starting point for this conversation? Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Cam Lake, Minister responsible for EC&E.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I believe just last week is when the department really went out and started working with childcare providers to get a better understanding of the financial situation. The feedback received based on the feedback, we are going to, sorry, is that a glitch there? Based on the feedback, the wage grid will be based on geographic location, current wages, roles, responsibilities, experience, post-secondary education, other education, and Indigenous knowledge. And as we develop it, there may be more factors to be taken into account. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions, Member for Cam Lake.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, childcare providers are concerned that given the N.W.T cap adjustment in annual revenues that's in place, and will also be, that they're implementing these wage grids, that they will not be able to meet the funding shortfalls that they might see, especially given the rising costs that we're seeing, whether it's through insurance, electricity, food costs. This has been highlighted multiple times in this House over the course of the implementation of the new child care subsidy structures. So how will ECE ensure that funding shortfalls do not close daycares in the Northwest Territories? Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Cam Lake, Minister responsible for EC&E.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So what the member is talking about is an unacceptable situation where the implementation of a move towards universal childcare will actually cause, a collapse of the sector. So that is the primary thing that we don't want to happen, and so we are working diligently to ensure that that doesn't happen. As part of the development of a new wage grid, we are also working on a new overall funding model. So as we work with centres, as we understand their revenues, their costs, their needs, we can put into place something that will ensure that the revenue they receive is more that allows them to be sustainable. It's more predictable. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary, Member for Cam Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, one of the things that I'm hearing quite regularly is this concern over closed doors, and there's such a struggle to get your name on a list, to get your child in a door to begin with, then to start potentially losing those spaces is very scary for parents. It means that they're not able to go to work. It means they're not able to pay their mortgage. It means they're not able to continue to live. They're not able to support themselves. And so in light of all these concerns and the threat of daycares potentially having to close their doors, what is ECE doing to communicate these viable solutions and the work that they're doing with both childcare providers but also parents that are using the sector? Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Cam Lake, Minister responsible for EC&E.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So as I stated, the department has gone out and has been working directly with childcare providers. There's always ongoing discussions with the Early Childhood Association. On the website has a lot of information for parents. We are trying to determine what the wait lists are. A number of parents will put their names on a number of different wait lists. We don't really have a sense of how many duplicates there are, so it's very unclear at this point. So we're trying to get to the bottom of that as well, because we want to make sure that we know what the demand is so that we're better able to support it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions, Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My questions are for the Minister of ECE. As I've been sitting here this morning, I've been getting messages from residents that people on income assistance with payments for disabilities have not received their payment yet this week. It's my understanding there's been changes to the process and the form submissions, et cetera, and that has delayed the payment. Can the Minister speak to what is going on? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Member for Great Slave, Minister responsible for education, culture, and employment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I can look into this issue. I know just as MLA, I often get people in my office looking for their income assistance. We tell them to come to check at 1 o'clock. That's often when they come in, maybe a day later. But once the payments are issued, it can take 1 to 3 days for them to be processed by the bank. So it could be an issue with that, but I will look into this immediately. And the department is listening right now as well, so I'm sure they're frantically looking into it and will send me some information. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm glad to hear that, and I do appreciate that the Minister is responsive. However, it's my understanding that this delay has been caused by changes to the disability payment, and as such, people were submitting documents early this week. And so my question is, why would we make changes that are then being done right before the next payment, as people don't have their money in their accounts as of Friday? And that makes me worry that children aren't going to have food, rents aren't going to be paid. I can survive if I don't have money in my bank account. I have credit cards, I can go into debt, but many others don't have that option. And so can the Minister speak to what's being done there? Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Great Slave, Minister responsible for EC&E.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I'm not aware of any changes that were made at that operational level. The staff are getting ready to make changes to the system as a whole as we introduce the new income assistance stream for seniors and persons with disabilities. So that change should be happening sometime in the next few months. But as for a change that happened in the past couple of weeks, I'm not aware of that. But as I said, I will look into this. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I literally have people telling me they were asked to submit new forms at the beginning of this week, so I'm not sure what's going on here, and I do appreciate the Minister needs to look into this. Can the Minister tell us, is this also affecting the seniors' payments? I know that, and sitting here, a couple of my colleagues have also indicated to me they've had people reaching out, they have not received their money this week. Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Great Slave, Minister responsible for EC&E.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So again, I have to look into it. I don't have that information, but what I will say is that persons with disabilities and seniors, so people who we don't expect to go back into the workforce, they are often what's called payrolled. So they only have to submit their financial information once every 3 months, 6 months, every year perhaps. And so when you don't have to submit monthly, and when it's every 12 months, that could cause issues. People might not be, as familiar with the process if they've only done it, 1 or 2 times. So there could be issues with that as well, but I will look into it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary, Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do appreciate that this could just be a one-off, but given that I'm hearing from my colleagues, they are also getting emails of the same. I think this is a glitch or something is happening in the payment system. Can the Minister commit to ensuring that that money for those people is in their bank accounts by the end of the business day today? Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Great Slave, Minister responsible for education, culture, and employment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If the money is issued, that's one thing, but I can't control when it's processed through the banks. So if I could will it to happen, I would. But the Minister of Finance has also informed me that she has her staff looking into this to make sure it's not an issue on their end. So we're taking an all-of-government approach to deal with this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Oral questions. Member for Tuna-Day-Welde.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Earlier in my member statement, I talked about what's going on in Ford Resolution, and it's a little bit disheartening to witness what's going on there and listen to the Hamlet Council and also to the Deputy Mayor. And I also want to just apologize for not getting this questions to the Minister Maca sooner, but anyway, I just wanted to ask the question. Maca in regards to how did MACA work to assist the community through its challenges since 2019 to implement the work plan with MACA before pulling the trigger about a month ago. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Tuna-Day-Welde, Minister responsible for Municipal and Community Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the member for asking these questions. I can honestly say the member for Tuna-Day-Welde has been in constant contact and doing his job as the MLA. In regards to his question, it's going to be a little bit long-winded, but I apologize now. In March 2019, Municipal and Community Affairs entered into a co-management agreement with the Hamlet that expired in 2020. The MACA Regional Superintendent remained in regular contact, almost often daily, with the Mayor and SAO to provide ongoing support. In fall of 2022, the interim SAO provided quarterly reports showing a $1 million deficit. Municipal and Community Affairs regional staff visited the community in 2022 and were able to assist with some financial reporting. In a letter to the Mayor on October 13, 2022, MACA set out concerns and recommendations related to governance, financial reporting, and critical infrastructure and SAO recruitment. The regional superintendent was in touch with almost daily with the Mayor and Deputy Mayor from September to January 2022, urging Council to hire an SAO as was a legislative requirement. In February 2023, the regional superintendent and assistant superintendent met with the Council to highlight some of MACA's concerns. Council members repeatedly asked for administration at that time, and we were trying to work with them. Administration is our last step, and we were trying to work with them to come out there. The school community government met with the Council to discuss a custom training plan. MACA staff visited the community to meet with staff and Council in March, April, and May of 2023 to discuss and assist with financial and governance issues. The regional office continues to provide ongoing advice and support to the Mayor and Deputy Mayor after the Mayor resigned. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions, Member for Tuna-Day-Welde.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Minister, for your response. In your response, you talked about in 2020 the agreement, co-management agreement expired. However, in the Deputy Minister's press release, they talked about the MACA withdrew from the co-management agreement. And so my question is, Mr. Speaker, why did MACA withdrew from the co-management agreement despite that $640,000 cumulative deficit was not shared with the elected council? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Tuna-Day-Welde, Minister responsible for MACA.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the member is correct. In March of 2019, as part of their commitment to implement measures intended to improve accountability and efficiency of their programs and services, the Hamlet did enter into a co-management agreement and work plan with Municipal and Community Affairs. The agreement and work plan included recommendations for operational review conducted in months leading up to the agreement. The agreement expired. Again, I wish to stress it expired in March 31st, 2020, and while some of the objectives were not achieved, the Hamlet was demonstrating a commitment to successfully accomplish these objectives. It was therefore agreed that the Municipal and Community Affairs would continue to work closely with the Hamlet on the work plan and planned action items without extending the co-management agreement. So that was an agreement with the department and the Hamlet. Thank you. Mr.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions, Member for Tuna-Day-Welde.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Minister, for that. I guess the community's been wanting answers for some time, and we had a meeting in May, and I attended that meeting in that community, and they were still asking the question, where's the minister, where's the MACA staff, and that kind of thing. So anyway, so Mr. Speaker, it's clear that the residents of Ford Resolutions are frustrated. Will the minister go to Ford Resolution and consult with the community members and elected council before taking further action? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Tuna-Day-Welde, Minister responsible for MACA.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I just need to clear the air. So the mayor and the deputy mayor reached out to me. We had a conversation. They told me that they were going to be on, and I believe it was May 10th, they were going to have a meeting. I explained that I was traveling already, attending an FPT meeting, and that, however, our staff would be available. Our staff, we did give them that information, and staff was waiting the whole night to get the phone call to be brought in. So we were making ourselves available. I can advise you that I've written to the Deputy Mayor this week and offered to go into Fort Rest and speak to the community leadership as my schedule allows. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary, member for Tunade-Welde.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Minister. I think now that, it sounds like the administration is going to happen, and there are still concerns with the residents of Fort Resolution in regards to the water rates and sewer rates going up. Can the minister ensure the community that that doesn't happen right now until we have a better hand on what's going to happen in the administration work plan? And I'm hoping that the minister can probably explain that as he goes into the community once he's notified on the date. Thank you.
Thank you, member for Tunade-Welde. Minister responsible for MACA.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I do not have a timeline or implementation plan yet. The minister hasn't even started the required work to address the deficit and outstanding issues. So that work needs to be done. There may likely be some changes required to the Hamlet programs and services, including the water and sewer rates. However, we don't know that until we look at it. Municipal and Community Affairs is aware that several Hamlet programs and services are not currently functioning at full capacity, and there will likely be changes needed to ensure that residents are receiving this municipal services. Again, I would encourage the residents of Fort Res to provide support to the administrator as he undertakes the work required to help the Hamlet to set work on a stable and financial path. This includes discussions, issues, and concerns with the administrator once he starts on March 5th. But, Mr. Speaker, yesterday I had an opportunity to talk to a former superintendent for Municipal and Community Affairs, and we were having a conversation about administration and what the role is and how it's going to be done. So we are working on that, and I will work with the member to explain some of the ideas that we're looking at to make sure this administration is a short period of time. I want to make sure we have an elected council in there as soon as possible. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions, member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. My question is for the Minister of Education, Culture and Employment. Teachers need time and training to roll out the new and adjusted BC curriculum here in the Northwest Territories. Teachers may be expected to complete 2 or 5 two-hour courses over the summer. Apparently these courses aren't ready yet. This information was found on social media, not in formal announcement from the department or their education authorities. So can the minister tell us when the training materials will be ready and delivered to teachers? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Frame Lake. Minister responsible for Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This month, they'll be ready. There is a plan for the training. It was released on May 23rd, and so the actual plan is out there. I understand what the member is saying. These materials are not immediately available. There's no expectation that teachers will have to work over the summer. You know, that's the benefit of being a teacher. You get that little bit of time off in the summer there. So we're not trying to burden teachers with anything. I will say that in the upcoming school year, there will be some teachers who will be trialing the new British Columbia curriculum. So teachers of grade 4 to 6 classes as well as grade 9 classes. Schools were given the option of trialing some or all of the curriculum in those years. So some schools are implementing the full curriculum for 4 to 6 and 9, and others are just doing certain parts of it. So this is not all teachers in the territory. I just wanted to make sure that people were aware of that. The information about the curriculum and the resources, we provide that to the superintendents who then disseminate that among their school staff. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I want to thank the Minister for that. It's very helpful to get this information on the record and out there. Another issue that is that the department says transition must happen before the contract with Alberta Education ends for the administration of diploma exams. But, Mr. Speaker, this really shouldn't matter. Students did not write diploma exams while learning remotely during the pandemic. So will the Minister look at revising the timeline for this exams requirement or eliminate it? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Frame Lake. Minister responsible for EC&E.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I think there might have been some miscommunication. There is no expectation that we need to fully transition to British Columbia's curriculum before that the contract with Alberta Education ends. The contract ends in 25-26, marking the last year of diploma exams and the last year that students in grade 12 will use the Alberta curriculum. Implementation of the BC curriculum in all grades is anticipated for the 2027-2028 school year. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I want to thank the Minister again for that. It's helpful to get this information out there. It's not clear, though, how colleges and universities that still base their entry requirements on percentage grades will treat N.W.T students applying for admission when we start to switch to a proficiency scale. So it's also not clear how this proficiency scale grading will impact scholarships, and it's not clear how parents are going to be informed about the new assessment scale either. So can the Minister tell us what implementation measures ECE has developed to make sure our students can continue to apply and be competitive for entrance into colleges and universities? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Frame Lake. Minister responsible for EC&E.
Thank you. One of the nice things about partnering with a large jurisdiction like British Columbia is that colleges, universities recognize that the way that BC does its curriculum and its grading. And so BC does use percentage grades for grades 10, 11, and 12. It's up to grade 9 where there is the proficiency scale that the member is talking about. So there will be percentages for grades 10, 11, 12. As for grades 1 to 9, we're still working on what that might look like, whether or not we're going to fully adopt British Columbia's scale. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary. Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I want to thank the Minister again for that. It's really helpful to get this information out there because clearly there's different views out there or whatever. So professional teachers, though, on the front line are telling me that they're not ready or to roll for this rollout and they're not prepared. So how's the Minister going to act now to address these concerns and determine whether an implementation delay on the new BC curriculum is needed? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Frame Lake. Minister responsible for EC&E.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I've heard these concerns directly from the teachers. I met with the N.W.T Teachers Association a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago now, and they were expressed directly to me. And so I have been having conversations with the department, who is very alive to this. Most of them are teachers themselves, so they understand this. We have been working on the online courses, which teachers will be able to access at their leisure. There are professional development days. ECE is providing face-to-face seminars. So there's a number of ways that we are working with the education bodies and the teachers to ensure that teachers are prepared. I do understand the trepidation. It is a big change. I'll note that this has been delayed. I believe the initial plan was to roll this out maybe last year, and we've been pushing it back, and now it is a much longer rollout, understanding that there is the need for training. And I will say that some teachers are already using this as well. The Northern Studies 30 curriculum, which is being piloted this year, does use the BC curricular framework, and some other teachers just like to use competency-based curriculum, and so they have been doing it on their own as well. So I understand there are some people who are very well prepared and excited. There's others who feel like they need more training and time for training, and so we are working hard with the Teachers Association and the education bodies to ensure that teachers do get that time they need. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Mumphrey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My questions is for Minister of Justice. Mr. Speaker, I know that there are 21 RCMP detachments in the N.W.T, and the smallest N.W.T community with a population of 104 has a RCMP detachment. So therefore, I have a question for the minister. This week we have been reviewing the supplementary estimates. There is $1.5 million to expand that First Nations and Inuit policing program. That's good, but Mr. Speaker, I want to know, does that funding include any new officers for N.W.T or Y.E.L.LOW-KNIFE? Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Mumfui, Minister responsible for Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've added quite a few new RCMP positions since I've become minister. I sometimes have difficulty keeping them straight which year we've added them, but I do know that we have added a number of positions in the members' regions for those communities, if not this year, the past couple of years. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions, Member for Mumfui.
Thank you. Yes, I am aware of that, but I'm just asking for N.W.T or Y.E.L.LOW-KNIFE, and they were not included in there. So, Mr. Speaker, we really need a stronger police presence in N.W.T and Y.E.L.LOW-KNIFE. There's no detachment or even a permanent officers, only visiting officers from time to time. Can the minister explore opportunities to increase the police presence in N.W.T and Y.E.L.LOW-KNIFE? Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Mumfui, Minister responsible for Justice.
Thank you, and I will amend what I said. Those officers are dedicated to those communities, but they are not stationed in those communities. As the member points out, they don't have detachments. But like I said, we've added a number of positions. We're always working with the RCMP to enhance their ability to do their job, and we will continue to do that. We're exploring options through the First Nation and Inuit policing program with the federal government. So we recognize these concerns, and we are looking at ways to address them. There's also, other ways to address some of these issues as well. Community safety officers are one option that we've recently gotten into, and perhaps that's a path forward to either, put resources in communities where there are none, or free up resources from other communities so we can distribute them other ways. So we are always looking at this. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions, Member for Mumfui.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I believe year-round police presence in N.W.T and Y.E.L.LOW-KNIFE is needed. Every time the visiting officers come, the community becomes quiet, and when they leave, it becomes lively. The situation is especially hard on elders. I just visited the community over there, and the leaders they express, they really want the RCMP stations in N.W.T, and also the elders are having a hard time. It's having an impact on them. So therefore, can the minister convey to the RCMP the desire for a stronger police presence in the Klitschko communities? Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Mumfui. Minister responsible for Justice.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary, Member for Mumfui.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, I just mentioned with a population of 104 has a police station. So, Mr. Speaker, small communities should not be denied policing. Even if we are small community, we need law and order in order to keep our residents safe. I realize there are only so many resources, but our small community need to be safe. Can the minister encourage the RCMP to work more closely with leaders in N.W.T and Y.E.L.LOW-KNIFE to meet their policing needs? Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Mumfui. Minister responsible for Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I said, every time I hear from the members in the House, I do ensure that information is conveyed to the RCMP, and the leadership in those communities have direct relationships with the RCMP as well, so I'm sure they're also conveying that information. So, between all of us, I'm sure the message will get out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions, Member for N.W.T.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question today for the Minister of Transportation in regards to the Dempster Highway from the corner to the N.W.T. border. Is the minister working with the Yukon government and the federal minister to see if we could get any funding jointly to get the highway fixed, because the wear and tear on everybody's vehicles is like from the Delta, Mr. Speaker, that is there any possible way to make agreement, I guess, with the federal minister to get monies for that road? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Nunukput. Minister responsible for infrastructure.
Kuinaini Okakti. Yes, the Department of Infrastructure is working with the Yukon counterparts. I just want to note, Mr. Speaker, that the Premier Pillay was up in Inuvik for the Northern Premiers meeting, and we had discussions on putting a joint submission forward to Canada, because the member is correct. I get a number of concerns that the Dempster Highway is doing a lot of wear and tear. I mean, we as the N.W.T. has done work from Inuvik side. We're not done yet, but I mean, we're working towards the border. Mr. Speaker, you're fully aware of the conditions once you pass the border going into the Yukon. We as the northern residents up in the Beaufort Delta, we use the Dempster Highway all the time for our supplies. So, I mean, yes, we are working with the Yukon government. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Nunukput.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When you hit the N.W.T. side, that's a real highway right to Sigachik. That highway is really well maintained and well done to the department. But as soon as you hit the N.W.T. border southbound, right to the corner, you're pounding out shocks and the wear and tear on not only the regular communities trucks, but to all the trucking companies too, because the upkeep on that highway is so bad. But Mr. Speaker, the question I have right now is, when will the minister be doing that joint submission with the Yukon, and is there a timeline on that to get it submitted to the federal government? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Nunukput. Minister responsible for infrastructure.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to note that at the meeting, we sat at the table. Premier Cochrane was there as well. Grand Chief for the Gwich'in Tribal Council was also at the table. We had really in-depth discussions. It's also a priority, and the Grand Chief had also mirrored some of my concerns as well. So, I mean, we are working together from the region to be able to further discuss. It is important because it's a vital link standpoint for resupply, but tourism opportunities as well that benefit both jurisdictions in the Yukon and the Northwest Territories. Arctic sovereignty, for example, is most importantly road safety for both territories. Mr. Speaker, we are working with the government. Premier Pillay had promised me that he would look into perhaps putting some money into the Yukon side. So I'm looking forward to furthering that discussion with him. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Nunukput.
Yeah, thank you for that, Mr. Speaker. Thank you to the Minister for that. But when would be able to get that joint submission in to get the monies to get that highway done? Just the timeline. Is it this summer that they're going to do a joint submission, or is the Minister going to go to Whitehorse to get that done? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Nunukput. Minister responsible for infrastructure.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I just want to note, yes, we're pushing from the N.W.T. standpoint, but realistically, this has to be Yukon-led. I mean, this is their part of the highway. We can't be submitting federal funding for another jurisdiction other than let's do this together. And I'm in terms of timeline, I'm hoping by the summer. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Nunukput.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Speaker. No, I'm really happy to hear that the work's going to be done by my minister, and hopefully she could get into the Yukon, into Whitehorse, to go and meet with the appropriate minister and to get this joint submission done and make them think it's their idea when it's actually ours. So I'm encouraging the minister to get down to Whitehorse as soon as possible to get this done, because it's just a little bit too much wear and tear on everybody's vehicles. And like I always said, you know, as the Beaufort Delta has more, we do more of our shopping and everything like that in the Yukon, so that road's really well in need of upkeep and care. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for N.W.T. Minister responsible for infrastructure.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, that's my, that's something I want to do. I've been having discussions with the Premier, and I continue to work with the Premier's office to be able to have a road trip from Dawson all the way to Inuvik and hit every pothole there is on that road. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Thabacha.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to, for the record, to talk about the housing stability worker for Fort Smith and the South Slave. And I want to ask the minister about this, because I think the person has to have a certain criteria. The criteria should be a person without judgment, a neutral person, a person who can navigate underprivileged clients in getting through the system for housing, and therefore it should not be a person who is part of the housing N.W.T office in Hay River. It should have a separate office, and that's the only way we would solve the problems. I wonder if the minister would agree with me on that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Thabacha. Minister responsible for housing N.W.T.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Premier had just tabled a document in regards to homelessness as well too, and this is one of the actions through this strategy as well too, but looking at how we would be looking at a housing stability worker, that is a conversation that we are having throughout the territory as well. And I do agree with the member that having this position not housed within housing and looking at further opportunities is what I would like to see. I like the innovative approach, and I would like to see the communities take more of a stronger partnership with us when we're addressing housing in the communities. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Thabacha.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, strong leadership with such a need within the whole Northwest Territories for the underprivileged that do not have housing is a mandate of ours, and I want to make sure that the person that is allocated to these positions are completely neutral and without judgment and navigate the system. Strong leadership in leadership with elected officials is extremely important and must give direction. And I want to know if the minister agrees with me. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Thabacha. Minister responsible for housing N.W.T.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And yes, I do agree with the member with this approach as well. We've tried this in the Clecho and looking at our successes and doing business differently and addressing housing differently as well. We've initiated this through the distinction-based funding and working with Indigenous governments. We've also done this with our community housing plans and identifying significant, drastic needs at the community level. And I feel that this approach is where we need to start strategizing and start thinking. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Thabacha.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Only when we do these kinds of changes will I regain my confidence in housing N.W.T, because I feel that the underprivileged and some of the situations that I tried to navigate through in the last 4 years have not been dealt with. And I feel that change is with oversight, neutrality, no judgment, and making sure that the underprivileged are looked after. Would the minister agree with me? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Thabacha. Minister responsible for housing N.W.T.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And yes, I do agree with the member. I think we should have this approach throughout the Northwest Territories, and within the 4 years, I know that it's been quite challenging for this government and for the communities to see a lot of progress within this portfolio. But we do have the renewal that has been brought forward as well too, and we do have the policy changes. The energy strategy has been brought forward, and with that approach, I'm looking to seeing housing approach and do things differently and recognize and work with the communities a lot more closely. And I would like to see decisions made at the local level and bringing those up to our table and right here into the Assembly for our discussion, so we can making sure that we do work productively with our communities and within this government. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Thabacha.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think that this housing navigator with a neutral approach would be the answer to some of the issues that many of us have been bringing forward, especially myself. I felt that I didn't get, this is the one file that I feel that many times that I failed on as very strong. I feel like a strong MLA who navigates for people who have not been treated fairly within the system, and I still feel that way. With the new policy that has come out for homelessness and all that, I hope that changes, and I look forward to change. And I think it should be a priority for us before we finish this session, this next session in August. Thank you. Would the minister agree with me on that? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Thabacha, Minister responsible for housing and N.W.T.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And yes, I do agree. I do agree with the member, absolutely. And when I had this portfolio, I wanted to see significant changes. I do come from a smaller community, and I do come home and I see these struggles right at the ground level, right from homelessness to outdated mortgages to mold in houses. And do we have the budget to address each and every one of these issues? This government and this portfolio has a 100-unit rollout, and I know it doesn't seem as significant, but Mr. Speaker, we haven't had a replenishment of units in the last 4 decades. And with the collaboration with the Indigenous governments, I brought forward the messaging from housing is that, if the federal government is not going to fund the territorial government, then fund the Indigenous governments directly, recognize those federal agreements, recognize those negotiations that are going on. And with that, successfully, we were able to see approximately 650,000 coming to the Northwest Territories, but directly going to the Indigenous governments, and we work with them side by side, Mr. Speaker. And but one thing I don't agree with is the member did not fail with the approach and working with us. She has brought in this portfolio to a different level where we are thinking differently. A lot of her advocacy has contributed to the policy changes, and I appreciate all of those comments coming forward. Thank you so much. Must seat, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Haver South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was kind of worried there that I might not have time, but Mr. Speaker, from the start of this 19th Assembly, I have talked about dredging. People want to call it harbor remediation, they want to call it harbor restoration, whatever, but really it is removing silt from the bottom of the channel and the harbor so that boats can come in and out. It's not just me that has talked about it. The member for Hay River North, when he was sitting on this side, he did the same thing. And, Mr. Bouchard, when he was here, he did the same thing. But we haven't seen any of the infrastructure ministers do anything in the last how many years with this. We haven't seen any dredging. People in Hay River have been asking for it. And I'm hoping that this minister will be different. We're giving her a chance to do something, like I said before, that the other ones haven't been able to do. So we are getting, like, we are all aware that, we are getting close to the shipping season here. We're getting close to, the commercial fisheries. The other day I was at a meeting and the fishermen were concerned. There's less than 4 feet of water in the channel, so when the fishing boats and MTS barges are loaded, they need a little bit more than that. So I guess what I'd like to know, is, after years of no dredging, can the minister confirm if this summer will be different? Are we going to be dragging boats through the channel? Are we going to be having, making a few dollars for MTS by pulling Coast Guard boats off? I don't know. But I think that, we don't want to be spending more money not getting freight up to the communities because they can't get through the channel at Hay River. So again, will the minister confirm if there will be anything going on this summer? And we need it done now. We don't need it done later in the summer. We need some type of action sooner than later. Thank you.
Thank you. Member for Hay River South. Minister responsible for infrastructure.
Say yes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, and I recognize the members concerned. I've been to Hay River several times to have a community meeting, and it is important to the members' constituents that there's great concern that we're not getting our tugs out of Hay River on time, and it reflects a lot of our disruption up the valley. So I think the members are going to be really happy right now because we are getting this started. And I appreciate that, we have talked about this, but, we really seen, last year where we just had struggles getting our supplies into Sax Harbor. That is still the point that we're at. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to let the member know that we are just finalizing an RFP for the initial phase of the dredging, if we want to call it harbor restoration, and it will be posted in the next couple days, Mr. Speaker, either today or Monday, and I will give a heads-up notice to both the members from Hay River on where we're at with the RFP process. But I also want to take this opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to thank the members for their patience as we work through a number of things, such as the engineering permitting process to get the first phase underway, which will concentrate on the channel, and the fisheries so that they can have access to the harbor, Mr. Speaker. I would be remiss if I didn't thank the federal government on their assistance in funding this phase of the harbor restoration. Mr. Speaker, we need our tugs out there in order to keep schedule this year. We need them. It's, very important to some of the members. Time.
Minister.
Speaker, it's important to this government as well as the communities to get supplies and fuel up the valley. We've spent a lot of money in the last year from this government, and we can't afford to do that anymore. So I just want to thank the member for the question. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Hay River South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That was pretty well the only question I had, and I'd like to thank the minister for the work that the department has done to make this happen. Like I say, in the last probably 20 years, we haven't seen anything happen with the channel, and I think people in Hay River will be pleased to hear, the efforts that the department and this government has made to make this happen this year. So, more of a comment than anything. Thank you.
Thank you, member for Hay River South. Taken as a comment. Colleagues, our time for oral questions has expired. Member for Kamloops.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's Friday, so I figured I'd seek unanimous consent to return to oral questions, number 7 on the orders of the day. Thank you.
Thank you, member for Kamloops. The member seeking unanimous consent to return to item 7. Are there any nays? Written questions. Member for Tunde Weldy.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Written questions I have is a document for unresolved matters of the Federal Indian Day School. I'd like to table this written question. I'd like to put this on record. Thank you.
Yep.
We're done. Okay, thank you, Mr. Speaker. My unresolved matters of the Federal Indian Day School. My questions are to the Premier regarding the unresolved matter of the Federal Indian Day School. Question number 1. On April 1st, 1969, the Roman Catholic Church and Anglican Church relinquished control of the Federal Indian Day School and transferred the programs to the Northwest Territories. There were 29 Federal Indian Day Schools in the N.W.T. where Indigenous children and youth were subjected to physical, emotional, and sexual abuse and cultural genocide. Can the Premier provide in detail the steps of the Government of Northwest Territories has taken to formally acknowledge and document these abuses? Question number 2. Survivors want an opportunity to share their experience and stories and preserve these for historical records. Can the Premier describe in detail what the N.W.T. has done to set up a commission to listen to these experiences and stories and establish an archives for ongoing learning and research similar to the Truth Reconciliation Commission of Canada? Number 3, Prime Minister of Canada and the Pope formally apologized to residential survivors and acknowledges the intergenerational damages caused by residential schools. What is the rationale for the Premier not apologizing for the N.W.T. role in its abuse and cultural genocide of Indigenous children and youth in federal day school? And question number 4, what position would the N.W.T. take on a class action lawsuit brought forward by survivors of the Federal Indian Day School? Mr. Speaker, I'd like to put this on record. Merci.
Thank you, Member for Tunde Weldy. Written questions. Written questions. Returns to written questions. Returns to written questions. Replies to the Commissioner's address. Replies to the Commissioner's address. Petitions. Petitions. Reports of committees on the review of bills. Reports of committees on the review of bills. Reports of standing and special committees. Member for N.W.T.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your Committee of Economic Development and Environment. Your Standing Committee on Economic Development and Environment is pleased to provide a report on supporting businesses and commends it to the House, Mr. Speaker. Executive Summary. The Standing Committee on Economic Development and Environment Committee made a priority early in the life of the 19th Legislative Assembly to increase northern responsiveness by government policies and services in an effort to stimulate diversity among northern businesses, particularly Indigenous businesses. To achieve this goal, committee reviewed government of the Northwest Territories, N.W.T. policies, programs, and legislation related to Businesses Development Committee, and also conducted internal research engaged with stakeholders and the public at large. Several members of the 19th Legislative Assembly raised concerns with support of private sector, especially response of the COVID-19 pandemic. Committee also considered all of information is used and informed the range of recommendations by the N.W.T. with the intent, the purpose of building and diversifying the N.W.T. economy and improving business support services and programs. Recommendation number 1, the Standing Committee on Economic Development and Environment recommends that the N.W.T. increase transparency to the capital projects and especially public 3-year capital plans and projects of small communities and regional centers so businesses can plan. Recommendation number 2, the Standing Committee on Economic Development and Environment recommends that the N.W.T. track and limit sole source contracts by creating a target to ensure 1, no more 15% of contracts over 25,000 are issued to sole source contracts. Regular public reports an achievement target to provide 6 months of the year end of each fiscal year. And these public reports outline sole source contracts given to non-N.W.T businesses, as well as the departments using sole source methods most often. Recommendation number 3, the Standing Committee on Economic Development and Environment recommends that contractual provisions limit change orders no more than 15% of the original cost of the project. And under regular review, the change orders requiring ministerial oversight and no change orders greater than $10,000. Recommendation number 4, the Standing Committee on Economic Development and Environment recommends to improve public reporting actual benefits achieved under negotiated contracts to better contract the impact of spending, and further recommends that N.W.T public reports and spending indicate local accommodations used by a number of jobs created. Recommendation number 5, the Standing Committee on Economic Development and Environment recommends that N.W.T review the U.S. Small Business Administration, the 8A program, which is currently serves Indigenous businesses, such as those owned by the Alaska Native corporations and Native Hawaiian organizations, in purpose of developing smaller programs like this in the N.W.T. Recommendation number 6, the Standing Committee on Economic Development and Environment recommends that we create and implement procurement policy to that address economic gaps in the N.W.T by giving preference to Indigenous businesses. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Member for N.W.T. Member for N.W.T.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move, second by the honourable member from Daycho, that the committee report 53-19 brackets 2, Committee on Economic Development and Environment report, Northern businesses deemed read and printed in Hansard.
Member for N.W.T. will have to make a short correction here. Okay. Thank you.
Honourable member from Frame Lake, that the committee report 53-19 brackets 2, Standing Committee on Economic Development and Environment report on supporting northern businesses be deemed read and printed in Hansard in its entirety. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for N.W.T. Motion is in order to the motion. Question has been called. All those in favour? All those opposed? Any abstentions? The motion is carried. The report will be deemed read and printed in Hansard. Member for N.W.T.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your hard-working Committee on Economic Development and Environment. I move, second by the honourable member from Frame Lake, that the committee report 53-19 brackets 2, Standing Committee on Economic Development and Environment report and supporting northern businesses be received by the Assembly and referred to Committee of the Whole. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for N.W.T. Motion is in order to the motion. Question has been called. All those in favour? All those opposed? Any abstentions? The motion is carried. Committee report 53 is referred to Committee of the Whole. Reports of standing and special committees. Reports of standing and special committees. Tabling of documents. Tabling of documents. Minister responsible for environment and climate change.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wish to table the following document. Government of Northwest Territories Response to Committee Report 39-19 brackets 2, report on the prevention and management of contaminated sites. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral question, tabling of documents. Tabling of documents. Minister responsible for finance.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to table the following two documents. Department of Finance's Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunications Commission submissions and 2023-2024 consolidated budget for the Government of the Northwest Territories. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Tabling of documents. Tabling of documents. Madame Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wish to table the following document, Emerging Stronger, Planning the Northwest Territories Social and Economic Recovery Together, June 2023 update. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Madam Premier. Tabling the documents. Tabling the documents. Minister responsible for Housing N.W.T.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to table the following 4 documents. Housing Northwest Territories Energy Management Strategy 2030, Housing Northwest Territories Energy Management Blueprint 2023-2026, Housing N.W.T Renewal Policy and Program Review Action Update, and what we heard, Housing N.W.T Energy Management Strategy. My seat, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Tabling the documents. Tabling the documents. Minister responsible for infrastructure.
Queen Okakti, I wish to table the following document, Plain Language Summary of Bill 93, Practice of Engineering, Geoscience, and Applied Science Technology Act. Queen Aini.
Thank you, Minister. Tabling the documents. Tabling the documents. Minister responsible for justice.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to table the following document, Letter to Chair of Standing Committee on Social Development regarding Government of the Northwest Territories intervening in Supreme Court of Canada case on the Report of Child and Family Services.
Documents. Member for YELLOWKNIFE.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wish to table a list of graduates from the YELLOWKNIFE riding, and I want to say congratulations to them. That's it.
Thank you, Member for YELLOWKNIFE. Tabling the documents. Tabling the documents. Colleagues, pursuant to Section 5 of the Indemnities, Allowances, and Expense Regulations of the Legislative Assembly and Executive Council Act, I wish to table the summary of members' absences for the period February 7th to March 30th, 2023. Tabling the documents. Tabling the documents. Notices of motion. Notices of motion. Motions. Motions. Member for Thabacha.
I move, second by the Honourable Member for Hay River North, that when this House adjourns on Friday, June 2nd, 2023, it shall be adjourned until Wednesday, August 16, 2023. And further, at any time prior to August 16, 2023, if the Speaker is satisfied, after consultation with the Executive Council and members of the Legislative Assembly, that the public interest requires that the House should meet at an earlier time during the adjournment or at a time later than the scheduled resumption of the House, the Speaker may give notice, and thereupon the House shall meet at the time slated in such notice and shall transact its business as if it had been duly adjourned to that time.
Thank you, Member for Thabacha. Motion is in order to the motion. Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? Any abstentions? The motion is carried. Motions. Motions. Notices of motion for the first reading of bills. Notices of motion for the first reading of bills. First reading of bills. First reading of bills. Minister responsible for finance.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to present to the House Bill 95, Supplementary Appropriations Act, Infrastructure Expenditures, number 2, 2023-2024, to be read for the first time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Bill 95 has had first reading. First reading of bills. First reading of bills. Minister responsible for finance.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to present to the House Bill 96, Supplementary Appropriations Act, Operations Expenditures, number 1, 2023-2024, to be read for the first time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Motion is in order to the motion. Oh, sorry. We didn't have. Bill 96 has had first reading. Sorry. Getting ahead of myself here. Second reading of bills. Second reading of bills. Minister responsible for infrastructure.
Kuinaini Okakti. I move, second by the Honourable Member for Hay River North, that Bill 93, Practice of Engineering, Geoscience, and Applied Science Technology Act, be read for the second time. This bill repeals and replaces the Engineering and Geoscience Profession Act with a new act. The new act provides a modernized framework for the practice of professional engineering, professional geoscience and applied science technology, including for continuing professional development and discipline. Queen Aini.
Thank you, Minister. The motion is in order to the principle of the bill. Question has been called. Member for Great Slave.
Thank you. I promise I'll keep it brief. I just wanted to say that it's exciting to me as an engineer, professional engineer, to see this bill coming into the department that makes a lot more sense for it to reside in. The Department of Infrastructure probably, I think it's fair to say, contains most of the engineers that work for the government of the Northwest Territories. I do know also that in the past, the government itself did not necessarily register their engineers as they did not see them in the role of actual work of engineering. However, over the last several years and decade, there has been a change in that relationship and an understanding that while engineers may be working for the bureaucracy, they still have a function and a role that is engineering, and that they are parts of our council and our group as well. Another piece that this does is it allows for the registration of civil engineering technicians and technologists, which is an advancement in the territory. Previous to now, any of these people or these professions would have been registered out of Alberta and their association of PEGA. So it's really important that it be allowed to come to the territory, because technicians and technologists provide another form of employment in this area that does not require a 4-year university diploma and is university degree. It is rather a diploma program, which means it is a lot more accessible for many of the northern students, and hopefully something that I will see in the polytechnic curriculum when we get to that point. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Great Slave. Motion is in order to the principle of the bill. Question has been called. All those in favour? All those opposed? Any abstentions? The motion is carried. Bill 93 will be referred to Standing Committee. Second reading of bills. Second reading of bills. Minister responsible for Justice.
Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by the Honourable Member for Yellowknife Centre, that Bill 94, Miscellaneous Statute Law Amendment Act 2023 be read for the second time. This bill corrects inconsistencies and errors in the statutes of the Northwest Territories. The bill also deals with other matters of a minor, non-controversial, and uncomplicated nature in the statutes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. The motion is in order to the principle of the bill. Question has been called. All those in favour? All those opposed? Any abstentions? The motion is carried. Bill 94 is referred to Standing Committee. Second reading of bills. Second reading of bills. Minister responsible for Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by the Honourable Member for Boot Lake, that Bill 95, Supplementary Appropriation Act, Infrastructure Expenditures No. 2, 2023-2024 be read for the second time. This bill makes supplementary appropriations for infrastructure expenditures for the Government of the Northwest Territories for the 2023-2024 fiscal year. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. The motion is in order to the principle of the bill. Question has been called. All those in favour? All those opposed? Any abstentions? The motion is carried. Bill 95 has had second reading and is ready for third reading. Second reading of bills. Second reading of bills. Minister responsible for Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by the Honourable Member for Yellowknife Centre, that Bill 96, Supplementary Appropriations Act, Operations Expenditures No. 1, 2023-2024 be read for the second time. This bill makes supplementary appropriations for operations expenditures of the Government of the Northwest Territories for the 2023-2024 fiscal year. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. The motion is in order to the principle of the bill. Question has been called. All those in favour? All those opposed? Any abstentions? The motion is carried. Bill 96 has had second reading and is ready for third reading. Second reading of bills. Second reading of bills. Consideration Committee of the Whole of Bills and Other Matters. Bill 23, Bill 29, Committee Report 52-19 (2). Minister's Statement 264-19 brackets 2, table document 681-19 brackets 2 with member for Inuvik Twin Lakes signature.
Committee of the Whole to order. What is the wish of committee? Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. I move that the chair rise and report progress. Merci.
There's a motion on the floor to report progress. The motion is in order and non-debatable. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion is carried. I will now rise and report progress.
May I please have the report of Committee of the Whole, member for Inuvik Twin Lakes.
Mr. Speaker, your committee has been considering Bill 23, Bill 29, Committee Report 52-19, brackets 2, Minister Statement 264-19, brackets 2, and Table Document 681-19, brackets 2, and would like to report progress. And Mr. Speaker, I move that the report of Committee of the Whole be concurred with. Thank you.
Thank you, member for Inuvik Twin Lakes. Do we have a seconder? Member for Nahende. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion's carried. Third reading of bills. Third reading of bills. Minister responsible for justice.
Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by the Honourable Member for Yellowknife Centre, that Bill 72, Opioid Damages and Healthcare Cost Recovery Act, be read for the third time. And Mr. Speaker, I request a recorded vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Motion is in order to the motion. Question has been called. The Minister has requested a recorded vote. All those in favor, please rise.
The member for Hay River North. The member for Inuvik Twin Lakes. The member for Hay River South. The member for Thabacha. The member for Cam Lake. The member for Frame Lake. The member for N.W.T, the member for N.W.T, the member for Montfouille, the member for Great Slave, the member for Nahende, the member for Yellowknife South, the member for Saw-2, the member for Range Lake, the member for Inuvik Boot Lake, the member for Yellowknife Centre.
All those opposed, please rise. All those abstaining, please rise. Vote 16 in favor, 0 opposed, 0 abstentions. The motion is carried. Bill 72 has had third reading. Third reading of bills. Third reading of bills. Minister responsible for finance.
Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by the Honourable Member for Boot Lake, that Bill 95, Supplementary Appropriation Act Infrastructure Expenditures Number 2, 2023-2024 be read for a third time, and Mr. Speaker, I would request a recorded vote. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. The motion is in order to the motion. Member for Frame Lake.
Sorry, merci, Monsieur le Président. I know I'm the only thing that stands between the members and lunch, but I do owe it to my constituents and the public to explain how I'm going to vote on this bill. This bill, will, what it does, or what happened, of course, is that about 50% of the capital spending for 22-23 was not spent. The authorized capital was not spent. So what this does would increase capital spending by about $125 million, pushing it to levels higher than 5 of the last 6 years. And so the over-budgeting that's happening here for capital, I can't support this. What it does is requires us to run a larger operational surplus than we probably need to be doing, and thus less spending on programs and services that directly benefit our residents in areas like healthcare and education. Mr. Speaker, I'd also observe that it's probably not good practice where SUPs are tabled in the House and voted on the same day. We managed to avoid it this time, but I would not recommend that that happen in the future, because I think the public deserves to know what's in a SUP before we actually vote on it. I was disappointed at the lack of clear answers from the Minister and staff that required a lengthy statement in Committee of the Whole yesterday with no notice or copies provided in advance to members. For all these reasons, I will not be voting in favour of this supplementary appropriation and fully expect that the next Assembly will be asked to approve massive carryovers again about a year from now. Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Frame Lake. The motion is in order to the motion. Question has been called. The Minister has requested a recorded vote. All those in favour, please rise.
The member for Yellowknife South. The member for Sawtoo. The member for Range Lake. The member for Inuvik Boot Lake. The member for Yellowknife Centre. The member for Hay River North. The member for Inuvik Twin Lakes. The member for Hay River South. The member for Thabacha. The member for Cam Lake. The member for Nunakput, the member for Tunide-Willowday, the member for Montfouy, the member for Great Slave.
One more.
Henday.
All those opposed, please rise.
Lake.
Those abstaining, please rise. The results of the recorded vote, 15 in favor, 1 opposed, 0 abstentions. The motion is carried. Bill 95 has had third reading. Third reading of bills. Third reading of bills. Minister responsible for finance.
Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by the Honourable Member for Yellowknife Centre, that Bill 96, Supplementary Appropriations Act, Operations Expenditures Number 1, 2023-2024, be read for the third time. Mr. Speaker, I would request a recorded vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. The motion is in order to the motion. Member for Frame Lake.
Sorry, Mr. Speaker, I'm not finished yet. So I again owe it to my constituents and the public to explain how I'm going to vote on this one. I'm very concerned that the supplementary reserve will be exceeded on this very first SUP for 23-24 on the operations side, and I believe that there's going to be lots more spending required as a result of the fires and floods. So I don't think that this is good financial management, especially in relation to the climate emergency, and that we have to have a much larger supplementary reserve in the future, like we did 2 years ago, where it was $65 million. So I do want to commend the minister, though. She has carried through on her commitments as part of our budget 23-24 negotiations, and it has those commitments are contained in here, $4.775 million in new spending. I want to thank the minister for that. But that's really dwarfed by the $15 million in new funding for NTPC in terms of rate stabilization. Mr. Speaker, that's probably larger than the entire commitments the regular MLAs have secured through budget negotiations over the almost 4 years that we've been here. We had no heads up whatsoever about this. or discussion with MLAs before this was brought forward in the supplementary appropriation. And I think that kind of thing should really, we should be told about this ahead of time. And I think this is really as a result of some poor planning by NTPC. We heard my colleague from Yellowknife North talk about how the fuel costs were estimated at $1 in the general rate application. And what we've really, though, witnessed is a failure to actually lower energy costs here in the Northwest Territories. And that's what the NTPC should be doing, building energy self-sufficiency and doing itself out of a job through the use of renewables and alternatives. So I think it's fair to say that regular MLAs have wanted fundamental change at NTPC. We want to get away from a board of deputy ministers that have been in place since 2016 or the last 7 years. What we did, Mr. Speaker, was we negotiated a commitment for a discussion paper on governance. But on March 23rd, the finance minister said in this House that we would get an options paper. While I can't really talk about what was given to us, Mr. Speaker, I can tell the public that it was not an options paper. We received a 2-page letter with a 2-page attachment with a cabinet decision. No options presented. We got a cabinet decision. Again, I think regular MLAs wanted to have some input on this. We're going to perhaps have an opportunity to talk about it, unfortunately, behind closed doors. But I think the future of NTPC and the need to lower energy costs in the Northwest Territories is still a live issue. And I need to bring some attention to this, Mr. Speaker. So I will very reluctantly vote in favor of this SUP because it does provide follow-through on the commitments during the budget, but in no way can my vote be considered consent or agreement with providing a further bailout to NTPC. There's a cabinet's broken promise on that, on NTPC governance, and I think they need to work with us more closely on that in the future. Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Frame Lake. The motion is in order to the motion. Member for Thabacha.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to reinforce my belief in the expansion of the Tolson as a greater, greener energy. I don't always agree with my colleague, and I want to make sure that there has to be some support for the staff and the direction that is taken for greener energy and for climate change in the Northwest Territories. We have to give the new president and their staff an opportunity to do that. It hasn't been long since he's been in that position. There are some things that are not quite right with regards to how it's done, but I just want to make sure that greener energy is my colleague. I respect my colleague, okay? Because he works hard. But hydro is the cleanest energy that you could ever get. And with that, I'm supporting this supplementary, like he said he's going to do too, but I have to make my position very clear. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Thabacha. The motion is in order to the motion. Question has Member Minister responsible for Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to be very brief so there's no misunderstanding for the public. The money that's going towards NTPC isn't necessarily to support their operations. This is a rate stabilization fund increase, Mr. Speaker, and that is really quite specifically because given the costs of fuel, which everyone's experiencing, the government experiences it too, and Northwest Territories Power Corporation experiences those increases in rates or increases in fuel, that winds up being an added cost that was not built in to the rates during the last rate process. Therefore, now they're facing costs that were built in at $1 and suddenly are at $1.50. That's a significant change, Mr. Speaker. Add to that we're in a low water cycle. Therefore, at the Snare facility, when they have to burn diesel to make up for low water, firstly, they're having to burn diesel to make up for low water, and they're burning that diesel at the higher rates. So this wasn't an anticipated high cost, and that's why it's coming as a SUP. in such circumstances when the rates aren't set at that high number, a rider kicks in. The rider kicks in to ensure that, of course, that the corporation can remain viable by having the costs reflect, or by having people's rates reflect the costs. So, Mr. Speaker, rather than having individuals, residents have to bear that rider right now, have to bear that increase, which, if I recall correctly, was between 28 and 35% increase to people's rates. That's why this is before the House. I appreciate my colleagues' support on it, but I did want to clarify for the public why there is this a significant amount there. It really is to ensure that the rider doesn't kick in and rates don't reach those kinds of levels. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. The motion is in order to the motion. Question has been called. All those, the ministers requested a recorded vote. All those in favour, please rise.
The member for Yellowknife South. The member for Saw 2. The member for Range Lake. The member for Nuvik-Boot Lake. The member for Yellowknife Centre. The member for Hay River North. The member for Nuvik Twin Lakes. The member for Hay River South. The member for Thabatcha, the member for Cam Lake, the member for Frame Lake, the member for Nunavut, the member for Tunide-Wellede, the member for Montfouille, the member for Great Slave, and the member for Nahende.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. All those opposed, please rise. All those abstaining, please rise. The results of the recorded vote, 16 in favour, 0 opposed, 0 abstentions. The motion is carried. Bill 96 has had third reading. Third reading of bills. Third reading of bills. Mr. Clerk, can you please determine whether the Commissioner of the Northwest Territories, the Honourable Margaret M. Tom, is prepared to enter the chamber to assent to bills?
Please be seated. Masi sotini ke se tsanye ke masi jo atine sinie na haigainta gutli egalanta.
Sydney se cha yon that o katalot na se cha constituency had on Northwest Territories on katana patlek kalsi cha N.W.T. Good afternoon, Alicia. Premier Cochrane, ministers, members, legislative assembly staff, visitors to Chatarat. Marcy, I thousand, Nazonter is theatre, John, he tassin or hell the Ionones in Sichano TC. That oh, a gallo nasio, that Utla the Catalo now, I ate an apart on Corey. I eat no, it's a territory is done, it's a benaneke, the Garrick Conzo, the healthy N.W.T, healthy no a year tantanate, not till so Noswe, a tathil, the celebration of Hill, the
Healthy and happy summer as you take your break, a well-deserved break, and enjoy quality time with your families. Please travel safely on the land and on our waters, the air and on our highways as you continue working for the betterment of all Northerners. Encourage and remind your families, friends, and people in your communities to be safe out on the land and to wear personal flotation devices, or PFDs, when traveling by boat on our waterways, and to take very, very seriously the fire bans put in place as we are experiencing severe forest fires in our territory. As this session comes to a close, I wish the members of this House good health, happiness, as you enjoy the summer and continue the work in your constituencies. Now, as Commissioner of the Northwest Territories, I am pleased to assent to the following bills. Bill 72, Opioid Damages and Healthcare Costs Recovery Act. Bill 79, an act to amend the Judicature Act. Bill 90, an act to amend the Legislative Assembly and Executive Council Act number 5. Bill 95, Supplementary Appropriation Act, bracket Infrastructure Expenditure, bracket number 2, 2023-2024. Bill 96, Supplementary Appropriation Act, brackets Appropriation Expenditures, bracket number 1, 2023-2024. Martselos, thank you. Kwanane, merci beaucoup. Kwana.
Members, before I adjourn our sitting until August 16th, 2023, I would like to thank you for a productive sitting. During this sitting, members have appointed new law clerks to the Assembly, passed 5 pieces of legislation, and introduced four more bills to be reported in the next sitting. It was a short but productive sitting. Please join me in thanking our interpreters for the important work they do, making our proceedings available in our official languages. Colleagues, also join me in thanking the pages. It was a pleasure having them back in the chamber. Hopefully some of them will be back one day as MLAs. Members, you have raised and discussed many different and important issues this session. Members have discussed emergency response and impacts to fire evacuees, the importance of infrastructure in the vitality of small communities, holistic support required for those experiencing homelessness, support for those experiencing addiction, as well as youth in care. Members, thank you for bringing forward the concerns and issues raised in your writings. I also want to take this time to acknowledge the firefighters and frontline responders working hard to manage the active wildfires across the Northwest Territories. Colleagues, in June, National Indigenous History Month, we must remember and celebrate that in 1975, the Northwest Territories Council, as it was known then, was the first legislative assembly in Canada to have a majority of Indigenous members, a tradition we maintain to this day along with our sister territory, Nunavut. The unique system of government we both share is not perfect, but it reflects the Indigenous values of cooperation, respectful debate, and working together. In a reflection of the Assembly's shared commitment to diversity and reconciliation, this session we introduce Indigenous-style cloaks for our table clerks. Many celebrations and assemblies lie ahead this summer, from National Indigenous Peoples Day to annual assemblies and other events. Members, enjoy this opportunity to get out and celebrate with your constituents. While we look ahead, we cannot forget the challenges that face residents across the Northwest Territories. I want to take this time to acknowledge the families in the Northwest Territories who are looking for their loved ones. As mentioned in this house earlier, young Frank Rubin still remains missing. No parent should have to wonder where their child is, and I encourage anyone who knows anything about Frank Rubin to call Crime Stoppers at 1-800-422-8477. Help bring Frank home. Members, I want to acknowledge the residents of the N.W.T, whose community was greatly impacted from wildfire. This will be a season of repairing and rebuilding. I know you will all continue to support these residents, and I encourage you all, the residents of the N.W.T, to enjoy the days ahead with family and friends. Our summer is short, yet we are blessed with a midnight sun. Get out on the land and the water, but please be safe and encourage your constituents to do the same. Use caution when traveling on the land. Look out for one another. I look forward to seeing you all back in August for our final sitting of the 19th Legislative Assembly. Mr. Clerk, orders of the day.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Orders of the day for Wednesday, August 16th, 1:30 p.m. Prayer, minister statements, member statements, returns to oral questions, oral question 1548-19-2, recognition of visitors in the gallery, acknowledgements, oral questions, returns to written questions, replies to the Commissioner's address, petitions, reports of committees on the review of bills, reports of standing and special committees, tabling of documents, notices of motion, motions, notice of motion for first reading of bills, second reading of bills, Bill 64. Consideration in Committee of the Whole of bills and other matters, Bill 23, Bill 29, Bill 77, Bill 82. Committee Report 52-19-2, Minister Statement 264-19-2, Table Document 681-19-2, Report of Committee of the Whole, third reading of bills, orders of the day.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. This House stands adjourned until Wednesday, August 16th, 2023 at 1:30 p.m.
Order!